Welcome to the mother relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Ahead of what is to be the McCaskill versus Sandy Ryan unification match, manager and trainer extraordinaire Rick Ramos stated,
"Undisputed is a fucking scam."
in reference to what Jessica McCaskill might do beyond the Sandy Ryan fight, should Jessica win, being undisputed is a fucking scam. If all of the promoters are pushing undisputed, it's a scam. The next fight won't necessarily be a Jonas undisputed title fight.
Natasha Jonas, Sandy Ryan, Jessica McCaskill. They're all welterweight champions at this time, though Jessica McCaskill herself has already been an undisputed welterweight champion. She beat Cecilia Brækhus for all the belts.
Why does Rick Ramos think that undisputed is a scam?
Well, the way it works.
There are two perspectives in play here as to why title fights, unification matches, and undisputed fights take place.
Rick Ramos added, "Why fight 5 fights for the price of 1?
The way it breaks down for the consumer, the whole point of a title fight, a unification match, and a subsequent undisputed bid, the whole point of that is to see the best fighters fight the best fighters. For the consumer, the boxing fan, that is the appeal.
That's the point.
Matching a fighter, a champion, against overmatched opponents really isn't going to spark the consumer's curiosity. Now, champions versus champions, unification matches, and undisputed.
The best versus the best, essentially. The best at a given weight.
For the customer, the consumer, the boxing fan. That's the appeal. That's the point. Watching the best fighters fight the best fighters. Essentially, the best versus the best.
It's the consumer perspective. From the promoter perspective, the business perspective, why do promoters stage title fights, unification matches, and subsequent undisputed matches? What's the point for them? What's in it for them?
Why do they do it?
Well, when you groom a fighter, you develop that fighter and bring them up the ranks. The hope is that by the time that they become a champion, they'll be a little bit more popular. It's all about enhancing a fighter's profile so that they can eventually become a draw.
By having them climb up those ranks and getting them to a world title, and once they're a world champion, if there are other world champions at their weight, you hope to stage unification matches on the road to undisputed in the hope
that it'll make them more popular,
more marketable, with more marquee value, a bigger draw that generates more money, sells tickets, sells pay-per-views.
That's what the hope is.
Champions versus champions. In making those fights, they are trying to captivate the audience's interest by staging the best fights involving the best fighters at a given weight. That's the hierarchy of thought. That's the point. For the promoter, the reason you have a fighter pursue a title or a unification match.
You're trying to get eyes on a fighter. You're trying to get eyes on a fight.
A few nuances aside, that's why the promoters do it.
It's not necessarily saying that you have to be an undisputed champion in order to be popular. There are a good number of fighters that aren't undisputed or unified champions, but they do have some popularity. It really isn't an exact science, but when you see promoters staging these kinds of fights, the hope is that it will enhance the fighter's profile, that it will help make them more popular and more marketable.
So for the consumer, the customer, these kinds of fights are all about watching the best fighters fighting the best fighters.
Entertainment value.
For the promoters, these kinds of fights are all about building value.
Trying to.
Marquee value, in the hope that if their fighter is the last man or woman standing and they become an undisputed champion, they will have become more popular in the process.
Though, as stated, it is not an exact science.
But that's what the hope is. Now, why? Why specifically is Rick Ramos saying that undisputed is a scam?
It's a good question.
It's got to be money related. Any discrepancies you see in the sport of boxing are usually motivated by money, gripes about money.
But I wouldn't call it a scam. I'd just say that it's not an exact science, because not every champion is paid the same way. Not every champion, unified and or undisputed champion, they don't all make the same money.
I think that's because not every champion, unified and or undisputed champion, is as popular popular as every other champion, generates as much money.
Yeah, different fighters got different marquee value.
Some have none. I remember when Rigo was the authority, the man to beat at super bantamweight. Very accomplished guy, he had belts, but he didn't have marquee value.
Not exact science.
Just of it seems to be that should Jessica McCaskill emerge the victor in the upcoming Sandy Ryan fight, tabbed to go down in September in America, the gist of it is, it don't look like Jessica's gonna pursue undisputed. It don't look like she'll pursue a Natasha Jonas fight.
But then the question is, if she's not gonna fight the only other champion at the weight should she win, what is she gonna do? Who is she gonna fight?
Guess we'll get those answers shortly. In men's middleweight news, Bob Santos, who trains Carlos Adames, WBC interim champion, says, I don't see how Charlo can beat Carlos Adames. Get the sense that that fight never takes place. I have to agree with him, given the state of Jermall Charlo, the amount of time that he's been out of action.
Yeah, I don't think those two guys are ever gonna fight.
The Dominican Republic's Adames owns the WBC interim middleweight title and therefore should be next in line to fight for Charlo's 160-pound crown. Bob Santos, Adames' trainer, still doesn't think his emerging fighter will ever get the opportunity to challenge Charlo, who hasn't fought in 2 years. Santos watched Jermall Charlo and his twin brother
Jermell spar countless times when Santos worked with Erslandy Lara,
then WBA junior middleweight champion. Based on what Santos has seen, the veteran trainer is completely confident Adames would be too much for the long sidelined Houston native if they fought.
Well, especially now the man hasn't fought in 2 years.
I mean, the other angle of it is that Jermall Charlo, at some point, he was a solid fighter. Solid, not spectacular.
He was decent as a junior middle, and all right as a middle, at least for a little while.
Though being the same age as a Canelo Alvarez, and having so little to show for it, so little in terms of resume, body of work, signature wins.
I mean, that's saying that even if Jermall wasn't inactive for the last 2 years, let's say he spent the last 2 years fighting, at least once or twice a year.
Right.
I still think Carlos Adames would give him a run for his money.
I still think he would. At this point, because he hasn't spent the last 2 years fighting, I think Carlos Adames would stop him. I think he's cannon fodder at this point for any middleweight with a pulse.
He's food for the gods.
Food for Adames. Adames, who Santos says is just a different athlete. It is what it is. He's a cut above. He's as gifted as any athlete I've seen. All things being equal, the camps being equal, everybody got in the best shape of their life. I don't see how Charlo can beat Carlos Adames. And now you've got to talk about Charlo, who hasn't fought in 2 years. I think he'd be hard-pressed to beat Adames.
Adames, who's coming off a knockout win over Julian Williams.
Was that a week or so ago? A common opponent between him and Jermall Charlo. Jermall, who gave Julian his first professional loss many, many years ago, 5 or 6, down there at junior middle.
Jermall is shit.
To travesty that
Shit.
Carlos Adames late last year went as far as traveling to Cancun for the WBC's annual convention, petitioning that they enforce his mandatory status on Jermall, and his petition was rejected, only so that all these months later, Jermall still hasn't fought. He still hasn't returned to action. It doesn't look like he's going to.
But he's still champion.
The WBC have given him more amnesty than the boxing fans feel he deserves.
2 years is a long time in the sport of boxing. 2 going on 3, because it don't look like he's gonna fight this year.
He was supposed to have been in the running for a Canelo Alvarez fight up there at 168. And in so many words, the story is he was unable to compete. He would not have been fit for competition.
I didn't really want to go on live, but I gave the fight to my fucking brother, okay? Y'all mad at me because I gave the fight to my brother. Let my brother fight. My brother gotta go up 2 weight. He gotta go up 2 weight classes. I want to fight the motherfucker, but it is what it is, you know?
See the state of the man. It's probably for that reason that Bob Santos is convinced Adames won't be one of the opponents Charlo considers whenever he does return. I'm not God, so I don't want to say 100%, Santos said, but I'm 90% sure Charlo is never going to step in the ring with Carlos Adames if he ever steps in the ring again.
Right.
There's a lot of times people say risks versus reward, and I know the Charlos pretty well, like I said. I've watched them over maybe 1,000 or more rounds.
It's a lot.
While I was with Erslandy Lara, And everything Charlo can do, Adames can do better. Both left-handed and right-handed. Adames fights right-handed and left-handed. He's got faster hands. He's a bigger puncher. And I've seen Adames spar with David Benavidez, Caleb Plant, all these guys. And I know for a fact he's a bigger puncher than Charlo. He's got faster hands. He's got faster feet. You see the demolition job that Carlos did on Juan Macias Montiel. The same Juan Macias Montiel that took Jamal the distance.
Don't give me the bit about styles making fights, because both Carlos and Jamal are boxer punchers.
They're both boxer punchers. Perhaps it's just that Carlos is better.
Better with that base style. At this point he is. Jamal is not who he used to be.
Not that he was ever that much, to begin with. Santos continued, so I don't see what Charlo would be able to do anyway, shape or form to beat him. Obviously, it's professional prize fighting, and anybody can get caught with a big shot, but outside of hitting the lottery, I don't see what Charlo would be able to do, and therefore, I just don't think they would ever take that fight, because he knows Adames does everything better, at a higher level, both right-handed and left-handed, so in their minds, why would they ever take that fight?
They wouldn't.
The state of Jermall Charlo is such that he can't get himself ready for a Canelo Alvarez fight. The biggest fight he could be in, the biggest financial incentive. If that's not enough to whip him into shape, nothing else will.
He should just retire.
Boozehound Charlo, Junkie Charlo, is said to have some issues outside of the ring that are keeping him out of the ring. The divorce.
What appears to be substance abuse of some kind. I don't know what he's under the influence of, but it's definitely something.
I saw the outpouring of sympathy as soon as that video from Jermall Charlo's Instagram stories started doing the rounds on social media. I don't think it's a Greek tragedy.
Not really.
I just see a guy who the WBC should hurry up and strip because he's in no state to fight. He's not going to fight.
When Bob Santos says that he doesn't think Jermall is a part of Carlos Adames' future, I agree.
In fact, I don't know that Jermall has a future in the sport anymore at, 33 years old?
2 going on 3 years removed from it?
Because it doesn't look like he's going to fight this year either. I don't know that Jermall is ever going to return to the sport of boxing, and if by some chance he does, he's not going to be who he used to be.
The inconvenient truth.
And just in keeping with the theme of news at or around these weights, Oscar De La Hoya says that Canelo Alvarez is an old 33. The 33, that's not the oldest.
Canelo's not the oldest boxer, but he's definitely weathered.
Although he being Canelo Alvarez, was once viewed as essentially the best fighter that the sport had to offer, Alvarez has ostensibly lost a step. The pernicious power that would immediately put his opponents to sleep appears to be a bit more benign. Also, Alvarez once flaunted a flawless face after most of his fights. His defense now, however, ensures that he leaves the ring with a bit more bruises than usual. Oscar De La Hoya, from a distance, has noticed some of Alvarez's slippage. Although his birth certificate indicates that he's in his early 30s, De La Hoya points to the miles on Alvarez's odometer as a clear indication that his time near the top of the sport is just about over.
Canelo is an old 33, said De La Hoya to a group of reporters recently. Not because he's been in wars, but because he started professionally when he was only 15.
I don't often agree with things that Oscar De La Hoya says or does, but in this instance, he may be onto something. Canelo's around 32, 33 years old, and he's got approximately 60 to 62 fights.
Jermall Charlo, who we just talked about, he's around the same age as Canelo with half the fights.
Where Canelo has approximately 63 fights at age 33, Jermall has 32.
That same age.
Demetrius Andrade, who's 1 or 2 years older than Canelo Alvarez, he's only got 32 fights. That's saying that these guys may be in the same age bracket, but Canelo has more than half the fights.
It wears you down.
Adding to that, De La Hoya stated that Jermall Charlo could be even more dangerous for Canelo. Canelo's former promoter, Golden Boy Promotions CEO Oscar De La Hoya stated this fight could be more dangerous for Canelo because of his opponent's speed and boxing style. Jermall is widely viewed as the more talented of the two brothers, and De La Hoya agrees that Jermall is the more dangerous opponent when compared to Jermall. Undisputed versus undisputed, it's great for boxing. People are surprised that he went with the smaller fighter, but I think the smaller Charlo could be even more dangerous for Canelo than the bigger one because he has speed and fights harder, and he's in your face, De La Hoya explained to Fight Hype.
I agree with that as well. The Jermell Charlo fight. Jermell seems a more inspired, more ambitious fighter to me than Jermall. Jermall is in no state to fight. No state to fight Canelo, no state to fight anyone.
Jermell, at least compared to his brother, he is, though at the same time, De La Hoya pointed out that the fight will also be difficult for Jermell since he will have to go up by 2 divisions to face Canelo. First of all, I take my hat off to Charlo for doing that. I understand it's a big payday for him, and he obviously took that into account when making the decision to fight Canelo, but it will be a difficult task, De La Hoya said. Canelo was last seen in the ring back in May when he picked up a dominant 12-round unanimous decision over John Rydier.
Both guys are going into this fight with handicaps of some kind. Some people feel that Canelo's in decline, that he's on the back 9. At the same time, Jermell, he's never fought at super middleweight.
And he hasn't fought in over a year, so they're both going into this fight with handicaps.
Not one way.
Errol Spence Jr., Jermell Charlo's stablemate, recently addressed the fight in his climb up to super middleweight, saying, "He's big, he'll be fine."
Many pundits and many boxing fans immediately billed Alvarez as a weight bully for choosing to fight Jermell Charlo, the smaller brother of the two. But if you look at the measurables a bit closer, Jermell has considerable physical advantages, a height advantage, a reach advantage.
And this speaks to what I've been telling you all along about this fight. Don't confuse Jermell cutting more weight than Canelo with Jermell being smaller than Canelo. He's not smaller than Canelo. He's literally taller than Canelo, longer than Canelo. He just campaigns at a lower weight.
Cuts more weight.
But he's not the smaller man. Charlo's stablemate Errol Spence Jr. said his cohort should size up well against the 4-division champion. Jermell has got some size too. I feel he'll mesh at 168 pounds really well. He can't just bulk up and get too big and then be sluggish.
What do you think Jermell Charlo walks around at? What, 170, 175, maybe 180? The man is 6 feet tall.
And he gets pretty big in between fights. It's been a long time since he had one. It's been a long time since he had a fight. Making 154 for a Tim Tszyu fight would have left Jermell Charlo depleted, having not made that weight in such a long time. But 168, that's more doable.
It is.
I think if he just walks around and waits, he'll be just fine. I think he'll be just fine. He's big for their weight class. He can fight. And I think he'll be more energetic at a higher weight. He can just sit around in front of Canelo and try to pick him off with shots and try to put fear in his heart. But I think Jermell is a big guy, so I think he'll be just fine.
And two things can be true at the same time.
That it's risky for Jermell to fight Canelo at 168, but he's going into the fight with some advantages. And while Canelo may be a very weathered 32 or 33 years old,
and he is,
if he's declined a bit, if he's lost a step to where he's not 100%, maybe he's 75, maybe he's 70, 70% of a Canelo Alvarez may still be enough to beat Jermell Charlo. It's a genuinely intriguing fight, and being honest, I like the fight.